The cold metallic clang of the door sealed shut behind her, the sound reverberating through the narrow, dimly lit hallway. Dr. Zara Patel's breath caught in her throat as her palms pressed against the freezing steel wall. She had been placed in the wolf cell, a notorious holding chamber designed for the most dangerous of prisoners, and she was no exception. The eerie green lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the concrete floor, while the sounds of distant machinery hummed in the background. "Do you know who you're dealing with?" she called out to the two alien guards stationed just outside the cell, her voice steady but edged with frustration. They remained silent, their eyes narrowing at her defiance. They were from the Vrash, an alien species known for their ruthlessness and cold efficiency. The tall, reptilian creatures wore dark armor, a uniform of oppression, their tails twitching nervously in the confined space. Zara knew what they saw, a human medic with no more fight left, someone they could break easily. But they were wrong. Dr. Patel had spent the last 12 years treating the wounded in the toughest of environments, battlefields, emergency zones, conflict zones, but nothing had prepared her for the cold, calculated cruelty of the Vrash. She had been captured while on a diplomatic mission, a simple request for aid turned into a trap. Zara's reputation preceded her. She was no mere medic. She had seen things, witnessed humanity's ingenuity and will to survive when every other species had failed. Now, she was about to test her own survival skills. "You can lock me in here," Zara said, her words laced with a deadly calm. "But I'll find a way out." The guards exchanged glances, their alien eyes unreadable, but they did not respond. Zara smirked to herself, turning her attention to the faint, rhythmic clicking noise echoing from deeper within the cell. It wasn't the usual mechanical hum of the containment units, this sound was something different, something alive. She squatted low to the floor, peering through the bars of her cell, her breath steady despite the unsettling atmosphere. There, in the far corner, a pair of glowing red eyes stared back at her from the darkness. It was a wolf, an alien predator that had been locked in this very cell before her. Its fur was slick and black, its claws extended like knives. It was a creature bred for violence, a genetic weapon of destruction. And now, it shared the same space as Zara. Zara stood up and walked to the far side of the cell, her mind racing as she catalogued her options. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and danger. Sweat prickled her brow, but she didn't flinch. She had faced worse before. Her medical training had been forged in fire, and her resilience had been tempered by years of dealing with unimaginable trauma. She needed information, anything that could help her escape, understand what the Vrash were planning. As a medic, she had learned to read people, and she could tell that there was something off about this particular cell, about this whole situation. She approached the wall and ran her fingers over the smooth, cold surface, searching for weaknesses. The walls were reinforced, designed to withstand even the most persistent of attackers. But the wolf cell was not meant to contain someone like Zara. She wasn't just a medic. She was a survivor, a strategist. Her mind raced as she calculated her next move, but before she could act, the door to the cell opened with a hiss, revealing a figure Zara did not expect. A human, or at least, someone who appeared human, clad in the black uniform of the Vrash's elite guard. His face was obscured by a helmet, but his posture suggested confidence, authority. He stepped forward with a deliberate pace, as though he were aware of the power he held. Zara's pulse quickened, but she maintained her composure. "Who are you?" she demanded, narrowing her eyes. The man's voice was cold, his tone betraying no emotion. "You are far more dangerous than you appear, Dr. Patel. You should have stayed out of this conflict." "I didn't start this war," Zara said, her voice steady, betraying no fear. "But if you want to make me a part of it, you'll soon regret it." The man chuckled, a sound that made Zara's skin crawl. "Perhaps. But it's not your choice to make." The door slammed shut behind him, the heavy thud of metal locking in place. Zara's heart hammered in her chest as she stared into the darkness of the cell. The wolf, still watching, shifted ever so slightly, its glowing eyes glinting in the gloom. What had she just walked into? And more importantly, how could she survive this? The Vrash had underestimated her. She was no ordinary captive. And they would soon learn the true cost of their mistake. The next few hours felt like days, each moment stretching thin, taut as a wire. Dr. Zara Patel sat cross-legged on the cold floor of the wolf cell, her thoughts racing in a whirlwind of survival tactics and desperate hopes. She had only one goal now: escape. But escape meant understanding her captors, and that would require more than just brute strength. It would require patience, cunning, and maybe even something a bit more dangerous. The wolf, a creature from another galaxy, still lay in the far corner, its eyes unblinking, its enormous frame as still as a stone. Zara didn't trust it, but it was a constant reminder that she wasn't alone in this cage. The silence between them was suffocating, almost oppressive, but she ignored it. She focused on the task ahead. There had to be a way out. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden hiss of the door. Zara's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't allow her instinctive panic to take control. Instead, she straightened her back, prepared herself for whatever came next. The figure that stepped through was the same man who had visited her earlier, the one in the black uniform. This time, his helmet was off, revealing a sharp jawline and piercing gray eyes that seemed to see through her. "You," Zara said, her voice edged with defiance. "What do you want from me?" The man's lips curled into a thin smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're far more resilient than I expected," he said, his tone calculating. "I'm impressed." "Impressed?" Zara repeated, rising slowly to her feet. "I'm a prisoner, not a pet. You don't get to be impressed with me." His eyes flickered briefly to the wolf, then back to her. "You're not just a prisoner, Dr. Patel. You're a piece of something much larger than yourself. This war, your people don't realize how much danger they're in." Zara's brow furrowed. She stepped closer, trying to read his expression. "What are you talking about? The humans are already in danger." "From you." He let out a low chuckle. "Yes, from us. But there's a bigger threat. A much larger one that even we are trying to control." Zara took a step back. "What do you mean? Who else is involved?" The man's lips parted slightly, and for the briefest moment, Zara thought he might reveal something valuable. But instead, he straightened, his posture stiffening. "I'm not here to explain. I'm here to make a choice clear." He gestured toward the door, where two guards stood waiting, their cold eyes scanning the room. Zara felt the air around her grow heavier. She could sense a shift, something was about to happen. Before she could react, the man continued. "You will be transferred to another location soon. The wolf is part of your training. It will be your only companion in the next phase of this experiment." Zara's mind raced. Experiment? Her heart sank, but her resolve hardened. She wasn't just going to be some subject for their twisted games. "What kind of experiment?" she demanded, her voice sharper now, laced with disbelief. "You'll find out soon enough." The man's eyes narrowed, and he motioned for the guards to step forward. "But be warned, Dr. Patel, the next phase will test you in ways you can't yet imagine. We don't need you to win. We need you to survive." Before she could react, the door slammed shut again, leaving her alone in the dark once more. Zara's breath came faster, her pulse hammering in her chest. She turned to face the wolf, which had now stood and was pacing the cell restlessly. The creature's eyes glinted in the dim light, as if it could sense the tension that had just escalated. Zara clenched her fists. She had no idea what this experiment entailed, but she wouldn't go down without a fight. She wasn't just going to survive. She was going to make sure the Vrash would regret ever underestimating her. The seconds ticked by as she stared at the creature in the corner, her mind working overtime. If the wolf was part of the experiment, maybe it wasn't as much of an enemy as it appeared. She knew nothing about alien creatures, but instinct told her that the key to her survival lay in understanding this beast. The cold, harsh environment of the cell had made it clear, there was no room for mistakes here. Her gaze flickered back to the walls, searching for something, anything that might help. That's when she saw it. A small, hidden hatch near the floor of the cell, just beneath the back wall. It was barely visible, a small seam in the reinforced material. It could be nothing, or it could be the key to her escape. Zara crouched low, trying to suppress her excitement as she studied the hatch. She could feel the walls closing in on her, but she refused to panic. This was it. The first real opportunity to get out. She didn't have much time. She was being transferred soon, and whatever experiment they had in store would be worse than what she'd already endured. As the seconds stretched on, Zara knew one thing for sure: she wasn't going to let the Vrash win. Not this time. The quiet hum of the ship's ventilation system was the only sound that filled the wolf cell, but to Dr. Zara Patel, it was a constant reminder of her captivity. Her eyes darted over the room, searching for any sign of movement, any hint that the hatch she discovered could lead to her freedom. She crouched beside the hidden door in the back of the cell, her fingers trembling as she traced the edges of the seam. Her heart hammered in her chest. This was her chance. If she didn't seize it now, she might never get another. She checked over her shoulder, but the cell remained as silent as it had been when the man in the black uniform had left. The wolf, on the other hand, had grown more restless. It paced back and forth, its hulking form casting eerie shadows against the walls. Every few seconds, it would stop, its head swiveling toward her with that same unnerving intensity. Zara couldn't help but feel that the creature was watching her, waiting for something. Whether that something was her escape or her demise, she wasn't sure. Taking a deep breath, Zara returned her focus to the hatch. It wasn't much, just a small, reinforced panel, yet it felt like the key to everything. There was no time to waste. She had no idea when her captors would return or what they planned to do with her. The words from the man echoed in her mind: "We don't need you to win. We need you to survive." The implication had been clear. Whatever they had in store for her wasn't about victory, it was about endurance. A test. A game. One she was unwilling to play. She swallowed hard, her resolve hardening. If she was going to survive, she had to act fast. With a quick glance toward the still-pacing wolf, she knelt closer to the hatch. Her fingers slid into the thin gap between the panel and the wall, and with a muffled grunt, she pried it loose. The sound of metal scraping against metal filled the room, loud in the silence. The wolf froze, its eyes narrowing. Zara held her breath. Had it heard her? For a moment, she thought her heart would burst from her chest. But then, the creature turned its massive head and resumed pacing, seemingly uninterested in her actions. The relief that washed over her was brief, fleeting. She pushed the panel aside. What lay behind it was dark, pitch black, even darker than the cell she'd been trapped in. But it was a passage. A way out. Zara didn't hesitate. She crawled into the narrow tunnel, the sharp edges of the walls scraping against her skin as she pressed forward. Her mind raced, the path ahead shrouded in uncertainty. She didn't know where the tunnel led or if it even went anywhere, but staying in the cell wasn't an option. She had to keep moving. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Her body ached from the cramped space, but Zara pushed on, her resolve unwavering. Sweat stung her eyes, and the air grew thick with dust, but the thought of the wolf behind her, its eyes following her every move, drove her forward. She had to escape, had to survive. And then, just when her strength was beginning to falter, she saw a faint glow ahead. It was dim, just a flicker of light, but it was enough to ignite a spark of hope. Zara quickened her pace, the sound of her breath growing louder, more desperate. She couldn't let herself stop now. The tunnel opened up abruptly into a larger chamber, and for a split second, Zara's senses were overwhelmed by the vastness of the space. She was standing on a raised platform, surrounded by walls that curved inward like a giant bowl. The floor was made of a dark, slick material she didn't recognize, and faint hums of machinery vibrated through the air. A sudden movement caught her eye. At the far end of the room, a group of figures stood, their backs turned toward her. They were dressed in the same black uniforms as the man who had interrogated her earlier. Zara tensed, her mind racing. Had they found her already? Were they waiting to capture her again? A figure in the front turned, and Zara froze, her blood running cold. It was the man from before. His gray eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, his face softened into something resembling a smirk. "Well, well," he said, his voice smooth and mocking. "You're more resourceful than I gave you credit for." Zara's stomach twisted. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a random encounter. They had been expecting her. She had played into their hands. The man stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "It seems we've underestimated you, Dr. Patel. But don't worry. You won't be able to escape that easily." Zara's pulse quickened. She took a step back, her mind racing. She had no idea what they were planning, but it was clear now, the stakes were higher than she'd imagined. An escape, it seemed, was no longer her only concern. The man's lips twisted into a grin. "You've entered the heart of the experiment now. Let's see how long you last." The man's voice cut through the thick silence of the chamber, sharp and taunting. Zara's mind raced, but her body remained still, the weight of the situation settling heavily on her shoulders. She had no escape route now. The walls of the chamber, tall and imposing, seemed to close in on her as the figure in the black uniform took another step forward. "You thought you could run, Dr. Patel?" His smile widened, like a predator toying with its prey. "You're in my domain now. You should have known better than to trust that escape tunnel." Zara's breath hitched, her heart hammering in her chest. She hadn't imagined it would end this way. The escape she'd fought for had been a lie, a carefully orchestrated trap. The walls seemed to press in on her, closing off any hope of retreat. She glanced at the men around her, 4 others, standing like silent sentinels, their faces masked in shadow. They weren't moving, but the tension in the air was palpable. It was like they were waiting for her to make the first move. But what could she do? "You're wrong," she finally said, her voice a little shakier than she would have liked. "You think I've failed. But you don't know who I am." The man in front of her raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by her defiance. "Oh? And who are you, Dr. Patel? Another scientist with an inflated sense of self-worth?" She narrowed her eyes. "I'm human. And you're about to find out just how dangerous that can be." Before he could respond, a harsh alarm rang through the chamber, the sound deafening in its intensity. Zara flinched, but the man's eyes didn't leave hers. For a moment, it felt like time had frozen. The alarm stopped as suddenly as it had begun, and the tension thickened, thick enough to suffocate. The man turned his back to her, pacing a few steps as he muttered to himself. "Not now," he grumbled, more to himself than to anyone else. Zara's instincts kicked in. Something was wrong. The sound of heavy boots echoed down the corridor just outside the chamber, and in a moment, the door flew open with a crash. A figure appeared in the doorway, a silhouette against the dim light, blocking out the shadowed hallway behind. Zara's heart skipped. Whoever it was, they weren't supposed to be there. The man in the black uniform froze, his face transforming from smug confidence to one of sharp caution. His eyes narrowed as he looked over the new arrival. The figure stepped forward, its form finally becoming clear. It was a woman, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in what appeared to be military fatigues. Her features were sharp, but the most unsettling thing about her was the gleaming weapon strapped to her back. She wasn't alone. A squad of soldiers filed in behind her, their movements coordinated and precise. The man, now visibly shaken, took a half-step back. "What is this? Who the hell are you?" The woman didn't answer immediately. She surveyed the room with a cold gaze, then finally turned her eyes to Zara. "It's been a while, Dr. Patel," she said, her voice calm, yet filled with a chilling authority. Zara blinked, trying to make sense of the situation. You know me?" The woman's lips curled into a faint smile. "I do. You're not the only one who's been watching." Zara was caught off guard, her mind whirling with questions. Who was this woman? Why had she come to her rescue, or had she? The man in black stepped forward again, his voice rising in alarm. "You don't know what you're getting into. This is bigger than you, bigger than anyone. You won't." "Shut up," the woman cut him off with a simple command. Her tone was razor-sharp, and the room immediately grew colder. "You've been playing your little games for too long. Now, it's time to end them." Without warning, the soldiers fanned out, their weapons drawn, a silent message in every movement. They were ready for a fight. Zara's pulse raced. The tension in the air was suffocating, but it was clear the balance had shifted. The enemy now had more than one force to contend with. The man, now pale and clearly rattled, reached into his coat and pulled out a device. Zara's eyes widened in recognition. It was the detonator. "You think you've won?" he sneered, pressing a button. "I'll destroy everything." Before anyone could react, the woman lunged forward, faster than Zara had thought possible. With a quick twist, she knocked the detonator from his hands, sending it skittering across the floor. The man stumbled back, momentarily stunned. Zara's eyes flicked between the woman and the man. "What's going on here?" The woman turned to face her. "I'm with the resistance," she said, her voice steady and sure. "You're in more danger than you realize. They were never going to let you go. But now, we have a chance to end this once and for all." Zara's mind raced. She had no idea what the woman meant, but something about her presence felt like a lifeline. It was clear now, there were forces at work beyond anything Zara had imagined. The world was more dangerous, more complicated than she had ever known. But in this chaos, there was also hope. The man in the black uniform scrambled to his feet, rage in his eyes. "You can't stop us," he shouted, his hands shaking. The woman smiled coldly. "You're already too late."